Hello, hello, hello. Denise Matto here. Welcome, whoever, wherever, whenever you are. Um, yeah, I want to talk a little bit about why I've been so heavily critical of the estuary movement, particularly of Paul Vanderklay, and I have begun to openly speak of them as being or forming a destructive cult. I think I really owe an explanation because it's very important what's going on. The estuary movement is international. It is something that is going to gain a lot of momentum because there is a natural need for that kind of faith, fellowship, intellectual, open, almost ecumenical kind of non church venue for fellowship and discussion so that we can all around the world keep our collective sanity because we are facing an anti human madness. Perhaps in some ways, the human race is suffering from some kind of mental illness pandemic. And we need a movement that's going to preserve a sane space. And Estuary has a lot of the possibility of being that movement. I don't believe the Estuary movement itself is a cult. I don't think most of the people in it are cult oriented, but the leadership and founders of it, Paul Vanderklay, I do believe that Paul Vanderklay is deliberately taking steps that are right out of the operations manual for how to set up a deceptive, hate based, destructive cult, which has an outward appearance of being a wonderful, warm, and fuzzy kumbaya space. And most of the people who go into that space are not deceptive or hate based or anything of the sort. So, why do I think Paul Vanderklay is such a nefarious character? Let me explain. My first interactions with all of this was when I started watching TLC videos. Um, and there's a wide variety of them, Christian mostly. Um, they're primary speakers at the estuary conferences, which it's basically you belong to some church or whatever, or maybe are just an interested individual. You can set up an estuary conference. It's kind of like TED Talks for Christians, you know. And they have some very interesting people who are regular speakers. Among them, John Vervaeke, the famous cognitive science consciousness author. I forget the name of the book he wrote, but he's written several, and he's very popular on the lecture circuit. He's not specifically Christian. He does cover a lot about human mental, spiritual consciousness. And then there's Jonathan Pageau, a very well-known icon carver who's written books about the symbolic world, what symbolism really is, what the symbolism of the Bible really means. He is an Orthodox Catholic, grew up in some general French Canadian. He says, I think he said that his family really went into non denominational Christianity more than the Catholic Church. So he had kind of a generally Christian, plain vanilla upbringing. Comes out of the French Catholic culture, though, which is very different from the Protestant, just in cultural terms. And he found his vocation in the Eastern Orthodox Church, carving icons, and writes many books. He's well worth looking at. Look up his business website is called Symbolic World, and he also has Jonathan Pageau Studio. So those are two of the popular speakers. that make an estuary conference well worth attending. Um, and there's nothing wrong with any of that. And the conferences themselves are probably wonderful. I haven't been to one, so I'm not going to say, but they appear, from what the videos say, they appear to be very nice ways to spend a weekend, or at least part of a weekend. But Paul Vanderklay, this is where red flags started popping up right away. When I decided I wanted to kind of step out, come out of the lurk, as they say, and Vanderklay will throw a link to invite people, just he calls them randos, just people to come up on his stream and introduce themselves and speak a little bit. So I did that. As soon as I appeared, before I even said a word, somebody in the chat started naming me and indicated that they knew me. And I had noticed there was someone in his chat. And I kind of raised an eyebrow, but I said, you know what? These people are all over the place. I don't know why they're in this chat. But I had noticed he had somebody in there that was using the word LARP in their name. And there was some conversation going back and forth that appeared to be out of the cicada LARP world. And I said, well, there are thousands of those people. There's no judgment when you see a few of them show up in the chat room. So, but when I saw that somebody there did know me, I thought, oh, there must be one of the trolls that have the history of attacking my family. And they go after families, not just the individuals. So I made a remark in Paul Vanderklay's stream. Well, I'm introducing myself, but before I get into anything, let me let you know that I have some groupies. They're called trolls, and I think there might be one in your chat. I don't care. I'm not going to argue. If they start trying to pick fights, ignore them. I don't care. I'm not even going to look at the chat. And then I went into what I wanted to say, which was introducing the concept of living without a label, without having to pick a team in the Christian world, born again, pre-trib, post-trib, Catholic, Protestant, charismatic, whatever. No, not picking teams. But dropping the idea of labeling yourself, I was saying, does not mean it changes your relationship to Jesus. And I just talked about how it turned out that it wasn't that easy. I took it as a New Year's resolution. I've been trying to do it all year. It's not easy. We talked a little bit about that. And then I went on my way. So I was just thinking, and I had no negative feelings or thoughts about Paul Vanderklay. The only thing that might come close to negative that I was thinking about him was that he's confusing, because he mixes his bricks and mortar church that he pastors in Sacramento, which is a mainstream Dutch Reform Calvinist old style Protestant church. Plain vanilla Protestant, you might say. He mixes their concerns in building that church and his concerns as a pastor with the estuary, which is kind of a public movement that really has very little to do with his bricks and mortar church. At least it shouldn't have. It should have very little to do with it. I mean, if he wants to do an outreach ministry for his denomination, you can do that. But that's done openly. And when you're doing an outreach ministry that's about building a more general kind of community that's not attached to your denomination, which is what estuary is supposed to be, apparently, it gets confusing. So I was still trying to figure out, is this a Dutch Reformed church with a recruitment plan? Or is this actually an independent Christian fellowship organization? And as I say, I noticed the red flag that the cicada, Discordian, chaos magic people were in there, but like I said, they're everywhere. And I moved on. The next red flag was not Peugeot, was not Vanderklay, but it had to do with Peugeot. There was a different stream set up by a different member of the TLC, and a couple of his guests appeared to be setting up a trap against Jonathan Peugeot because they are iconoclastic anti-imagery Protestants. And Peugeot had made a remark in Twitter about the Blue Mosque, the holy place of Islam, being very, very beautiful. And he compared it to the disgusting nonsense that you see if you go into many um, Christian non-denominational venues where they don't sometimes they don't even care to clean the place up. It's like they're not going to show respect for a worship space. And he simply made a remark that if you didn't know anything about the theologies involved, the Blue Mosque is definitely more conducive to prayer and worship than what goes on at these Christian concert halls. Very clearly, Peugeot was very clearly not promoting Mohammedanism over Christianity. He was not promoting Muhammad over Jesus. He was very clearly addressing the problem of respectful sacred space, which is his calling, is all about sacred beauty and art and architecture. So they decided to slander him by claiming he was promoting Islam and disrespecting Christ. Total lie. I went on. I kind of got triggered. And I said, and I went away. I said, well, maybe the TLC is all like. Then I watched some. I said, no, that was just a couple of the fundies, fundamentalists, Bible thumpers. And I'm not being anti-Christian when I speak of Bible thumpers because there are a bunch of people who thump that Bible, who really have nothing to do with what's in it, but they're very good at thumping it. And that's what these guys were doing. So I said, no, it's just a couple of Bible thumpers. I'm not going to worry about it. Okay. Well, then, of course, um, Vanderklay keeps promoting this guy, Grizz. I go to look at Grizz and I'm thinking, oh my God, the Cicada cult has some Christian identity sovereign citizen crap going on with militant militia. One of them is a guy named Roy Potter, who is now lately saying he's no longer Mormon, but he was he wrote a fringe Mormon polygamist defense of polygamy. Actually, he gave up his career as a police officer because the police department said, look, we don't care if you practice polygamy. We're not getting into your private lives. This is in a Mormon town. But you can't write a book defending it and put your name on it and wear the uniform. So they let him go. And he starts his whole militia thing going on. He was all involved with the Bundy standoff at the Malheur Reservation up in Oregon. He was doing Mormon priest duties, which in the Church of the Latter-day Saints, I don't know how it works, but basically the father of the family is somehow automatically also a priest of some kind. So I don't know what the story is with that. But he definitely was acting in the role of Mormon priesthood. And his channel, 50,000 subscribers strong, is all about politics, militia, and preppers. And I actually used to admire him because I am supportive of old fashioned American patriotism, the Second Amendment, the moderate use of Second Amendment rights, obviously. Um, I'm no radical, but I'm not stupid either. And I discovered when I was watching that channel back in 2016, one of the things he did was kept telling people to go over to this other channel and watch this guy. He really was good. People don't understand this guy, but he's really good. And there were people at that point, I had a popular channel. And the people that were coming into my channel also were watching Roy Potter. And they kept asking me, what did I think of this guy that he's promoting? And I didn't want to get into it because I really didn't want to get into the YouTube gossip scene. So finally, to satisfy my own chatters, I went over and I was horrified. The guy that Potter was promoting is a Discordian magic porn producer. Now, okay, there's a whole different set of values between a New England Catholic, Irish Catholic on my mother's side, French Catholic on my father's. There's a big difference between a New England style person and a Mormon. I don't really know the Mormon stand on sexuality and pornography. I really don't care to. I'm not. It doesn't concern me. But this guy was also a self-proclaimed warlock, very disturbing, nasty, just and very similar to Grizz. And I watched about 30 seconds of his stuff and came back to my own channel and said, I don't. I want to. That guy just gives me the creeps. I don't understand why Roy Potter is promoting him. And I didn't. And I just was going to let it go at that. But then that was the signal for the cicada brigades to take my channel down. Because, and I noticed in other things that Roy Potter said that he was using this guy. The guy's name was Monograph. He was using Monograph, who is a well known extortion ring troll army menace in YouTube, who has some kind of business structure going that gives him immunity in many ways. And so I faced all of that. And that was, like, say, 2016, 10 years ago. But the move, the mild, conservative, respectable looking pastoral type of personality promoting the satanic creep and basically using him as an enforcer. Now, I haven't seen that level with Paul Vanderklay, but when I went over and looked at Grizz, I was thinking, wow, this is creepy. It reminds me, but I'm thinking, oh, I don't really know. Grizz does a lot of very disturbing stuff in his videos. A lot of his video style, if you know anything about visual stuff and the psychology of visual art, video art, it's chaotic. There's a lot of subliminal messaging going on. I don't really care to try to figure out what the subliminal messages are because it assaults the senses. And so I turned away from it. He also has a very disturbing habit in the number of videos that I saw. I didn't continue watching them. When he's addressing a topic, he presents a playing card in some kind of gematria fortune telling spiel about it, and then he puts it aside and he goes into his topic. And if you were to simply pull up the transcript of the video and read the text, he probably comes across as a reasonable, highly conservative, MAGA conservative, maybe even that far. And you wouldn't think that all this other stuff was going on because it's all involved in the presentation style. It's involved in his tone of voice, in how he presents his demeanor on camera, and all of the various graphic design elements that he puts into his videos. Those don't come across in a transcript. So he's presenting some kind of conservative agenda dressed up in chaos magic left wing, nasty anti-Christian, and even satanic style. And Vanderklay he didn't just happen to mention, oh, he's a crazy guy, go look at his videos or something like that. He's been heavily supporting and promoting him. That's what says to me, this is one of the things a professional cult builder, a guy who has decided that this is the business plan. His personal life doesn't have to have anything to do with his public life. So he can be a Christian pastor of a mainstream, old style Protestant church with this strange anthroposophical marriage thing going on. Okay. Different strokes for different folks. It's a free country. And I'm not 100% against the Waldorf school system, although they are a cult school. They are into real tight mind control on the kids. But look at the public school system. Okay. There are some things the Waldorfs get right, and most of it they don't. But that's personal opinion. And theologically, though, it's an anti Christian system. They, the Rudolf Steiner religion is an anti Christian religion. Christ is introduced in it in the New Age ascended master type of figure, which has nothing at all to do with the biblical Jesus. And when that is the pastor's wife, who's a teacher in that system, you kind of scratch your head, because if Vanderklay was just another TLC channel owner generally present in the estuary movement, I wouldn't even blink at it. But he's a pastor of a Main Street, old style bricks and mortar church. And he is one of the founding organizers of the estuary group. That puts it in a different light. Couple it up with this Grim Grizz partnership. I saw Grim Grizz doing the monograph territorial control thing in another channel. Another person that is involved in the leadership who's not, I mean, he puts on a Christian front, he'll pray for you. He's getting some pushback from other TLC members because I guess he's talked about not going to church at all, that, he's angry because of the politics. And his politics are extreme violent left. He is promoting total propaganda falsehoods about what the ICE raids are really doing, claiming that ICE agents are smashing children on the asphalt. Really angry, really demanding that people take this stand. Okay, so I obviously don't agree with anything that guy says. His name is Mark Parker. But he has a stream, and Grim Grizz challenges him because Grim Grizz plays the MAGA side of the politics. And Paul Vanderklay promotes them both. He's got Parker trying to radicalize people into street politics on the left wing Antifa side. He hasn't said Antifa, but this whole demonize law enforcement and demonize American poor, demonize the American working class that can't drive trucks anymore because of the illegals taking those jobs, and the illegals aren't even safe drivers on the road. And the ICE raids are based on warrants of previously existing criminal actions. They've got lists and lists of people that they know came across the border illegally, got caught somehow or other, they got noticed. They were ordered to show up for court. They never did. And in many cases, they were arrested for committing actual crimes, robberies, assaults, vandalism, different kinds of fraud, a lot of fraud in there. So ICE is taking these warrants for existing crimes unrelated to crossing the border and putting the names of the illegals who are doing these crimes onto warrants to say, well, we're just going to get them out of here. And that's what the raids are doing. And in places like California, the raids are going into workplaces and schools and similar places to find these people because the local left-wing anti-Christian governments have told their local authorities not to tell ICE that they've got somebody. They just picked up somebody in a fight for assault, And oh, he's on your list because they all have lists of the disappeared illegals that have gone missing. And they say, oh, we got one of you guys, we just arrested him in this traffic stop or with drugs, or we just arrested him in this bar fight or this domestic violence case. Here he is. And then ICE can go and pick him up at the jail, not disturb other people, and deport him. But in California, among other similar states, the communist governments there, they are Marxist governments, have stated clearly that they not only don't want ICE going into their jails to pick up known criminals, but they are taking steps to protect these illegals. Okay, that's a whole political thing which nothing to do with Christianity and everything to do with politics. But this Mark Parker guy is all into that. That's extreme. He's getting pushback from other TLC members because they're figuring out he doesn't even go to church. But he'll offer prayer for people and keep the front running. It's easy to pretend to be a Bible thumper. It isn't. It's not hard to do, and it's probably fun for the ones who are doing it as parody. Um, and he's one of Paul Vanderklay's fundraisers for the Living Stones Church. The Living Stones Church in Sacramento has this guy doing their fundraising ads for their church, not for Estuary. So Grizz goes on to Parker's stream to challenge him on his illegal alien politics. And there was some little scuttlebutt back and forth where Grizz was calling him out on the propaganda because Parker was promoting the crazy left-wing propaganda that, the ICE agents are monsters. And Grizz challenges him, but does it in his obnoxious way that says, okay, the guy's a conservative. I guess he's on our side, but he's a little bit embarrassing. You know, everyone's got somebody like that in the family. But then what Grizz says to Parker is when Parker says, why are you so set against me? Because Parker's trying to pretend that he's a nice guy, that his politics are moderate, reasonable, love everybody, biblical Christian politics. So therefore, why does Grizz not like him? And Grizz's retort was because you're bringing your stuff into my domain. Now that right there, it's a sign of a mental disorder on Grizz's part in terms of his being some kind of narcissist. So what? But Paul Vanderklay is deliberately promoting a chaos magic practitioner who thinks about his intellectual space as a territory. You don't invade a territory. That's cult. 100% cult. And so Grizz, and it puts me in the position of saying, hey, in this case, I kind of side with Parker that, Grizz is totally off base here. But I'm noticing that Vanderklay is the common element between these two guys. And the whole thing might even be a staged fight. Vanderklay might be a Machiavellian narcissistic disorder person, the worst kind, the kind that are the most dangerous. The Machiavellian is the kind that becomes the most dangerous cult leader because he can set up this kind of dynamic. You've got Parker, the left wing hate law and order guy. Grizz, the I don't know what, but he's going to defend um, the conservative view guy. And Vanderklay promotes them both as part of the structure, the um, the structure of the estuary, not just people who are fun to have around and fellowship with. One is a fundraising element for the bricks and mortar church. That's Parker. Regardless of his politics. That's a questionable thing because, as I said, There's a big difference between an outreach for a denomination where people who go to that outreach know that they are being encouraged to join a particular denomination, and a genuinely ecumenical, non church based movement of Christian fellowship and discussion. It's a slight problem, not a big deal, but it's noticeable that there's that confusion level when you start integrating it, because Parkman, as far as I know, he's not a member of the Living Stones Church. If he is, then that only makes it even more obvious that there might be fraud going on the part of that actual church. How much dominance Paul Vanderklay has within it, I have no idea, because it's not my denomination. I don't go there. I don't even live anywhere near California. And who knows what kind of internal conflicts are going on over this. But the use of a figure like Grizz, that he's always pushing, Vanderklay is always pushing that guy out to the estuary TLC watchers. Now, that's what identifies Vanderklay to me as a deliberate Machiavellian, narcissistic cult founder, developer, someone who is set out from the beginning to set up a deceptive cult because he knows he's using deception with the people he's promoting. He puts out some interesting stuff himself. So if you just listen to what he has to say about Christianity or Jonathan Peicheau or Carl Jung, archetypal stuff, interesting guy. What's to not like? A little bit confusing when it comes to, well, he doesn't seem to keep it straight when he's talking to the general public or when he's talking to his church congregation, but he's getting up there in age. Maybe he just doesn't have a good sense of who's who. Not a big deal. But it's this kind of promotion that says something deliberate is going on. He wrote the protocol. That's what they call it. And that hit me right away. That word. That comes right out of a paramilitary cult that is at the foundation of the Cicada Discordian movement. Goes back to the 70s. Protocol is a big word with them, but like I say, it's also a common word in the English language, and it's the right word to use for describing how things are done. Paul Vanderklay wrote the protocols for the estuary movement, so he's not just a random fellowship-seeking Christian in this group. Okay, so last weekend they had their big conference up in Chicago, and almost all of the people that I'd been watching, there's only maybe two of them that didn't go and attend the Chicago meeting. And now they're all coming out with their videos and everything, and they all did some streaming and interviews while there and so on. And the promotion of estuary as a relationship building, it's the cult thing of it's about belonging, it's about being one of us. The cult bodybuilding is very, very strong. And as I said, that in and of itself is not a bad thing. We need that, especially young people, young men trying to protect their families against today's society. Public society is horrible. I mean, a young man now has to think about his pregnant wife being attacked by antinatalists, people who are against people who have children, who are giving birth. That's going on. It's horrible to think of being a young father today. He has to face what's his name, that rap star Snoop Dogg just did a thing about being horrified when he tried to take his kids to a children's Disney film, and some pretty disgusting sexual stuff was put right up there on screen, and he said he's done. He's angry at Hollywood for allowing it. Well, that's the plight of all young parents today, especially the young fathers. So I don't hold it against estuary that they're promoting a sense of belonging. But look who's exploiting the need for that. And the need is great. That's why this has to be examined early. Because if it's caught early, the same people who want a healthy cultural group type of cult, if you can catch it before Vanderklay has a really big chokehold on everybody, you can find a way to solve the problem. Awareness of how a Machiavellian narcissistic personality behaves when building a corporate organization, a church, when creating a cult. They lay the groundwork for the deception and for the sicking of people on each other. And you can watch Paul Vanderklay. And if you turn off the sound and just watch what he does, I mean, I don't mean body language. I mean, just keep track of who he promotes regularly and strongly as an important person in the social structure of the estuary movement and what they actually do. And this whole question of what's really going on at that bricks and mortar church, a lot of it you might say, well, it's none of my business because I'm this or that. I don't even belong to that. Well, still, if he's going to be the leader of your estuary movement, you do have to pay some attention. There's some exploitation going on. And if generally moderate Christian type people are being sucked into something quite different, you need to start noticing. The energy that you're putting into the foundation of the estuary movement could be put into that same foundation under different leadership if you need to. Separate the wheat from the chaff. Don't throw the good out, but do avoid ingesting the bad. That's why I'm doing this. I'm going to continue to be a thorn in Paul Vanderklay's side. And I hope people take my videos with a grain of salt. I'm just speaking from my own opinion. I can be wrong. But think about it and do your own research. And and question yourself as to what you really want out of this. Be true to the path that the Lord set in front of you and don't get pulled onto somebody else's path. Denise Matteau, over and out.